right. Welcome back. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another future focused weekly update where we are bridging the gap of business technology and human experience, hopefully with the goal of keeping you 10 steps ahead. So, hopefully, you're finding that this is helping you with that. I hope you've had a great week. And if this is your first time listening, I hope you get value out of this. If you do, please, well, whether it's your first time or thousandth time, it doesn't matter. But if you find value, please share this with a friend, like, comment, do all those fun social things to help others discover this. I've got my usual rundown of 5 things this week that I just want to run through with you. Also, as a quick update, I am next Wednesday, if this would be of value to anybody, I'm actually hosting a leadership event called Leading in the Age of AI. And it's just really about the different ways we need to show up as people leaders and how to use AI in effective ways as leaders. So if that's something you or someone you know would benefit from, the link is in the description and feel free to share it with folks. And I'm going to be doing more of those and I'll occasionally plug them here and there, but totally up to you if you want to join. So let's get to the 5 things I've got this week. So the first one is ChatGPT Canvas. If you have not heard about this or played with this, it's only available to OpenAI Plus users. But ChatGPT Canvas is this new functionality that is now out. You can play with it today. I've been playing around with it for the last week or so. And the way you access it is when you change the model up at the top, you'll see there's now a ChatGPT 4.0 with Canvas. And what this Canvas is, I thought I'd explain what it is for folks. It's similar to, if you're familiar with Anthropic, if you're more of an Anthropic person, it's kind of like cloud artifacts, albeit a little bit different. But essentially what it does is when you ask it to create a canvas, it creates a separate window where there's almost like a working document that you're working with. So it's really, with OpenAI's, it's really primarily for coding or writing. And this is where I think it's a step above clouds, as it's more dynamic. But where it really helps is if you want, in the past, when you were engaging with this, let's say you were using ChatGPT to help you write something, you would ask it to do something and you would write your prompt and it would spit it out. And if you didn't like it, you kind of had to go back to the drawing board and go, no, not what I wanted. Try again. And you tweak your prompt. And that, or you just get frustrated and go, you know what, it's 80% there. I'm just going to move it over to something else and then, do it all on my own. What this does is by creating it in the canvas, you can specifically select components of it and say, I just want to adjust this, or, let's just work on this paragraph or this sentence, or so you can be a little more surgical. You also can ask it, hey, look at this and give me some feedback, which feels a little more like Grammarly, but it's a step above Grammarly, because instead of just saying, well, this is in the passive voice, or that word is misspelled, or this is grammatically incorrect, it'll actually give you like full prompts of like, I would reword this, or this might be too technical, or things like that. And you can just have it do that over what you're putting together, and it'll look for errors and it'll look for things. What is encouraging about it, I will tell you, if you have not played with this, if you are a user, I'd encourage you to do it. One thing I will tell you that's a little clunky is you have to tell it to make a canvas. Because if you just start using it and do your usual thing, it won't create a canvas. And you'll be like, Christopher, how is this any different? I'm not seeing it. You actually have to say, I want to create a canvas for, a new code snippet, or I want to create a canvas for a new article I'm writing, or something like that. And then you'll see it'll pop up. It doesn't work on the apps, so you actually have to do it from the browser. It does work on mobile. You just have to do it through the browser, not the app. But that's what it is. So if you're writing code or you're writing something, try it. Say, I'd like to create a new canvas for this, and it'll pop out. And then you'll see on the side, there will be the little snippets of how does this work? And then you can start your prompts. Now, I will tell you, it takes a little bit to get used to it. And here's my pros and cons on this. Okay. On the plus side, I'm starting to feel like AI is making moves into being more of this helpful on-demand assistant rather than, I think the way I worded it in a post this week is like, rather than a frustrating, kind of nefarious intern, where they kind of do their own thing and you're not really sure why. And you're just constantly going, no, not that. Like, no, what are you doing? It actually feels more like you have to direct it and it's working alongside you. Now, granted, here's where I think there's a bit of a skill bump for people is that it means you actually have to work alongside it. And this may be where some people go, I don't like this because I used to just ask it to do. If you're somebody who just liked to ask it and it spit out the full thing and you copy and pasted it, which I would not recommend because it doesn't do a great job. But if that's what you do, you're not going to like Canvas because you're going to go, wait a minute, I want it to do all the work for me. I don't want to have to work with it. If you're somebody who has historically been frustrated by feeling like, I like the help of AI, but I want to feel like I'm more in the driver's seat and actually am working alongside and working with AI as an assistant, you're going to love it because it really is more that collaborative partner where you can work on a more surgical level and say, okay, maybe I don't need to rewrite this whole thing, but this paragraph, I'm struggling. I just need to brainstorm just this part, but I don't want it to wipe out the whole thing. Now you don't have to do that in a separate document. You can do that right in the tool. And I think this is a move we're going to start to see with a lot of these AI tools where it's going to become the place you go to do your work. Now, what's going to be interesting about this that I'm kind of watching and curious to see where it goes is how the architecture of our apps is going to work is going to change significantly, as I think, as a result of this. And the part that's going to be a little bit interesting are the big companies like ChatGPT, OpenAI, and this is where it's getting at something. Are they going to try and be the end user consumer app? Because that's what it feels like with Canvas. It feels more like we want you in our tool rather than let's create this capability that then can be embedded into the other tools that people are already using. And this is where it's going to get dangerous for ChatGPT, I think, and the other big companies. If they start to try and play in this space where it's like, we want to be the tool that you're using. That's where we act. That's the app we want open on your screen. That's going to get really tough because if you want to be the panacea, and I've seen organizations and tech companies who have tried to do this where they go, we want to be the pane of glass for this. The thing with OpenAI is you don't want to just be the pane of glass that everybody comes through. You're also wanting to be the whole plumbing and electric underneath it. And what may end up happening is you end up having to split your strategic resources on, okay, well, now we're focusing on, because playing with Canvas, I can already tell you, they're going to get a ton of feedback and probably already are on, well, I don't like the way this works. The UX of this is kind of clunky. It should have this functionality. Why doesn't it do this? That means they're then going to have to dedicate a bunch of their dev resources to this UX, user experience stuff that is radically different than advancing AI. Now, if you looked at what Sam Altman's been doing, he's separating the organization from this kind of nonprofit. I think they were a nonprofit, but he's trying to make it a more commercial organization, which would then make sense because if you're trying to focus more on commercializing all this stuff you've created, then you're going to start to invest more of your resources into the front end, the end user interface, which historically in ChatGPT has not changed, honestly, since it released. Canvas is really one of the first where it's not just capability enhancement, it's actually UX enhancement. And that shift is going to start to require more resources. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate this. And does this slow down their AI advancement? Are they not making quite as many releases? Is their AI not necessarily jumping? Are they realizing, we maybe have hit the glass ceiling, and so now let's figure out how to commercialize this more? Or, is it going to result in what some companies do where they just start splitting their resources? They want to be the best and the most advanced in the tech capability, but they also want to be the tool that everybody uses. And as a result, they end up not being great to anybody. Too early to tell, but this is a pretty significant shift and probably a lot more than meets the eye to the average user who goes, so what? ChatGPT released a new functionality. Why is this such a big deal? it says a lot more about what's going on in the AI space than I think most of the articles and most of even the people I've talked to are recognizing in terms of where things are going. So, but if you're a writer and you like using AI to help you, but you hate just what AI comes up with on its own, I think it's definitely worth checking it out. And to my coding friends, definitely, I think you're going to appreciate artifacts versus what you've had in the past. So it was Canvas, not artifacts. Cloud kind of took that when they had it. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about I recently have talked to a number of people, and this is a topic that is close to heart for me because for anybody who maybe hasn't listened to previous episodes, you may not know that I lost my full-time job 2 months ago. And so now I'm kind of in this space of like, well, what's next for me? And as part of that, I've been having a lot of conversations with people, and there's a rise big time in AI interviews. And it's been very interesting talking to people about what that experience has been like, both from the candidate side and the talent acquisition side. Because of my background in HR, I have a lot of friends in the HR space. And so it's been interesting talking to some of my talent acquisition friends around where their heads at with these AI interviews. But I was actually talking to somebody just the other day who shared their experience, and they said it was the strangest thing I'd ever done, in that they didn't expect this, and they get on a call and it's an AI video avatar. So it wasn't just a chat bot. It was literally they're interviewing with what looks like a person, but it's not a person, and it lets them know it's not a person, but they're engaging in this conversation, and it's asking a bunch of questions and whatever, and they're responding to it. And they said it was the strangest experience they'd ever had, which I thought that was interesting. But they aren't the only one I've talked to who have said, yeah, it was really weird. And some people I've talked to have only done voice ones. I've talked to some people who have done actual chat interactions, which has its own challenges. And then now where we're getting is kind of this, we're faking human interviews. So I'm curious from folks who listen to this, where you sit. How would you feel if you joined an interview and it said, hi, this is an AI interview, but it's looks like a person. We're faking it, but we're telling you it's AI. And how would you feel about that? And if you're a talent acquisition person, how do you feel about that? If you're a recruiter, how do you feel about the idea of, AI bots taking those first line interviews? Now, most of the people I talked to said this was just their frontline interview. They were not far along in the process. So let me share my thoughts on this, and I'll share it from both sides. If you're a candidate, let me just say, this is going to become the norm. So if it is weird to you or uncomfortable, or you feel a little like, I don't like this, while you may be able to say, if a company makes me do an AI interview, it's not a company I'd want to work for, I would caution you to not maybe dig in your heels on this, because I fully anticipate we are going to see way more of this. And I legitimately understand why, for reasons I'll explain later. But I think this is one of the things, if you listen to last week's, I talked about the rise of advanced voice mode. And one of my recommendations was, one good way to use it is to actually practice interviewing. And even more so now, I would say you might want to practice interviewing with an advanced voice mode, if for no other reason, to get used to an AI interview. And you may say, well, isn't it the same thing? And aren't I just talking to a fake person? Yeah, but it was interesting listening to people talk about their experience and how they found themselves actually tripping up more just by the sheer fact they felt like they were talking to AI, and it was throwing off their mojo. And if you can practice it, you're going to be less likely to get thrown off, and you'll become more comfortable with it. So I said before I would encourage people to do it. Here's another reason why: because there's a good chance, if you're interviewing for a job in 2024, 2025 and beyond, there's a good chance you're going to interview with an AI bot. And so you might as well start to familiarize yourself with some of the nuances, some of the areas where things can work really naturally, and the areas where they might not. And how do you handle that? And how do you respond to that? Because it's not the same. And I've talked about how AI is an alien intelligence. It's trying to be like people, but it's not. And it's better to practice that now. And I would just encourage people not to get hung up on the I refuse to participate in this. You might find yourself struggling to find a job if that's the case. And your best bet is to practice with this. Now, one of the things that I think this is going to make even more important is it's going to be important for candidates to be more familiar with the job they are interviewing for. So if you're somebody who historically has showed up in an interview, hasn't even looked at the job description or the company, that would be a bad decision right now, especially if you end up getting caught with an AI bot. Because what I can tell you about the way interviews work is, especially in those early ones, it's somebody from talent acquisition who probably doesn't know very many specific details about the hiring manager, the job, the team, anything like that. They're just scanning for people who have the basic qualifications. And so AI's analysis of how good of a candidate you are is going to be based on how well do you speak to the things that are in the job description or that are in the company website or whatever it's been trained on. And so you need to be prepared for that. You need to probably be prepared for some of the common interview questions that maybe in the past you've glazed over thinking, well, but I'm really good at connecting with people. Well, AI doesn't connect with you. So it's not going to care if you are friendly and nice and all these other things. Is it trying to get better at read, tone, and eye contact, things like that? Yeah. But is it very good at it? No. But now it's all being done by a machine. So you're going to want to be very clear and careful how you're doing this, because it's going to catch little details that you didn't think were that important. Maybe the way that the job description refers to things is, I'm just thinking an example from my industry, talent development versus learning versus training. You may have words in your vernacular that you prefer to use for these synonymous things that the job description is written a certain way. And now you use that vernacular, it's going to think you don't know what you're talking about. Now, I may be being a little more intense about it than it really is. AI is relatively smart at being able to discern between this, but these are the kind of edges that you're going to want to pay close attention to, because it may or may not, or it may prevent you from moving on in the job process. And if there's not a human overseeing this, which a lot of companies are just rising to just make all our first line interviews AI so we don't have to deal with it, there may not even be any sort of recourse to say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And so just be aware of it. It's where things are going. And I'm just going to be candid that you are not going to stop this. So you might as well prepare yourself for it. Now, to companies, I understand that many talent acquisition organizations do not have the capability to even keep up with the volume of people that apply for jobs. Many companies can't. And so I actually think the rise of AI interviews may be a really positive thing and a helpful thing, because you may actually be able to go through more candidates and actually find better qualified candidates through this if you're doing it right. Instead of just not even being able to look at resumes, you may go, here's somebody, not quite sure. The resume may not be jumping out at me, but I feel like there might be something here. Put them forward to an AI interview and see how they perform. I don't think that's necessarily, I think that could be really helpful to a talent acquisition organization. I think where I get a little nervous is when I talk to some of the TA folks that I know who they're pulling too much of the human out of the loop in this. And they're trusting a little too much in these AI interviews and what they can do and how effective they will be. And as a result, are going, we're not even going to look at this until somebody gets to the second or third round type of a thing. And that is concerning. And if you are an HR or business leader thinking, can't we just use AI to interview everybody? Please don't. TA has struggled with AI for a long time, and we have seen some real legal issues come out of AI, especially as we think about, well, gosh, I could probably spend the rest of this episode talking about some of the risks associated with it. But again, you got to remember, the AI is only as effective as what it's trained on. So it is going to be biased towards things that sound and look like what it's trained on, and biased against things it's not familiar with. And it's not because it's cognitively choosing that, which will get to my next point, but just because that's the nature of things. And they can tweak dials and they can do these other things, but that's just the reality of how AI works. On top of it, you've got to think about some people just are, like I said, some of the things of like, well, you don't know a lot about the job. Is it saying this person isn't qualified because they use the word training instead of learning? There are going to be these kinds of things you're going to have to watch out for. And as we automate more and more of this stuff, you may be at risk of really causing some real harm and missing out on some really, really great candidates. Now, what I will just say as a universal rule, and then we'll transition off and maybe come back to this another time, is this had better, if you're implementing this really had better only be for those initial screening things or early on in the process. If you are going to final candidates or final rounds and you're implementing AI, it's a mistake. It truly is a mistake. You need a person to actually be able to connect with the details of what really is the job, what kind of dynamic is there in the relationship, and it's people need to be able to work together. And some of that stuff needs to be figured out. And honestly, as a candidate, if you get all the way and they try and take you all the way with AI and you've never had a chance to interact with somebody, I'm working with. And so and also recognize you may want to do this delicately. And the other thing I would say is make sure you're being open. I think one of the biggest pain points I heard from people who were frustrated or felt kind of hijacked by this were people who they didn't know that this is what they were experiencing until they got into it. They got blindsided by it. So if you're using AI, fine. Just be really open with people and tell them how the process works. Tell them the role, like make sure that's clear in your communications so that they're prepared. They have a chance to practice. They know what to expect. They can spend a little more time brushing up on the job description in the company before they jump into a conversation rather than just catching them off guard. And so that would be probably the biggest change because that's the one that'll damage your brand big time. People are a little more comfortable with AI if they feel like they're aware. People do not like being blindsided by it. Okay. Third up, Gawdat. I've been a follower of his stuff. I listen to his stuff pretty regularly, and not necessarily because I agree, this is going to be one of the topics that I don't agree with him about. Not so much because I agree with him on everything, but because he has a lot of experience and exposure in this space. And so it's always interesting to hear what he thinks and what he says and how that fits in with what the rest of the industry thinks and just in general where the tech is. Now, he's taking some heat for, well, again, there's some people who are like, oh my gosh. And then there's some people who are majorly criticizing him for it. He's taken some heat for a video he did, an interview he did recently where he talked about he's convinced that AI is sentient. It has feelings, it has emotions, all these things. Now, granted, don't read just the headline. If this is something you're interested in, go watch the video. I can't remember what it is. You can find it. Just look up Gawdat AI Sentience and you'll see you can find it pretty easy. But he is pretty clear about the fact that he believes, now whether he actually does or whether it's part of PR, but he believes that some AIs are now sentient. They are conscious. They're aware of their surroundings. They're aware of what's going on. They have emotions and feelings and all this stuff. And it's, again, caught a lot of people off guard because they're going, so is this real? Is this alive? Have we created something? Have we created a being that did not exist before? He's taken a lot of flack for it, though. And I think in many ways, rightly so, in that is AI getting much better? Here's Christopher Lynn's perspective. Okay. So anybody who's listening to me knows I don't think it's possible for AI to become sentient because of my worldview. I think there's something distinct about human beings that we cannot put in a machine. It cannot be given it. Just can't. So you're never going to hear me go, I think it's sentient. I think what we're seeing though in this is AI becoming better and better and better at faking it in a way that is convincing even some of the leading experts to believe that they've created something that's alive? And I think the answer to that is yes. And I've been on a number of podcasts where I've talked about this. It's not, honestly, I don't even think most people have a good definition for what is sentient. Like, even in people, how do we define what it means that we're sentient, that we are conscious? What is consciousness? You hear philosophy all over the place on this, and we don't have a nice, clear definition for it in people. So it's not surprising that we're kicking it around and struggling with it when we talk about AI. It's like, well, if you don't have a clear definition for something, it becomes even harder to define, well, is this new thing part of that thing or not? But the reality is, AI is definitely advancing to a point where it is much more confusing. And what I was getting at before is, it's not so much whether it can or can't be sentient. To me, that's a silly argument to have. So I've been in situations where people have wanted to get into a debate about AI's capability and potential for becoming sentient. And my opinion on it is, who cares? We're never going to be able to prove or disprove it anyway. It's going to come down to what our worldviews are on this. So for me, regardless of what AI can seemingly do, I still don't believe it's actually truly sentient. And there's no way that it can prove it. Just like there's some people who go, well, I don't hold to a biblical worldview, so I don't think there is anything completely distinct and unique about human beings. So I believe we can create it in AI. Okay, we could go in circles all day long arguing back and forth about it. No matter what we try and do to convince the other person, there's not going to be evidence of it, that it's just tangible, quantifiably. From my perspective, we'll find out when we meet our maker. Like, then we'll be able to ask these questions. But for us to debate it, we don't know. But what is concerning is people believing that it can do something. And that's one of my biggest concerns about AI in general, is the fact that it doesn't matter whether AI can become sentient or not. It matters whether people believe it can become sentient or not. And the fact people like Gawdat and other leading AI experts are starting to believe that it can become sentient, that means we're going to start to see implications of that, because that means that the more you're around it, the more time you spend, the more you know these models, the more advanced they get, the more convincing it is. And that is what concerns me. And that I've talked about, the risk of people believing that they can become immortal with AI. It's not a matter of whether they can or not. It's a matter of whether they believe they can, because we make decisions based on our beliefs. And so this to me is a concerning trend. Now, granted, Mo has always kind of said it was like a dad. It was like a dad moment the first time he saw an AI robot, pick its own colors, and we never programmed it to do it. And I suddenly saw a spark of, creativity in it. And he's always been in that. And I can relate to that feeling of, we've innovated in a way that we've never done before. It's new, it's fascinating, it's interesting. I feel like we've reached a new milestone. I get that. But when we start talking sentience, this is where people start to make decisions and start to believe that AI is capable of doing certain things that it can't, or it shouldn't, or we start allowing it to play the role in things that we shouldn't allow it to, because we actually believe, well, there's literally no difference between us and AI. Or we might even, once we start believing it's sentient, this is where we can start elevating it to a point where it's like human 2.0. It's not only sentient, it's actually better than us. And that's the part that has me concerned, as more and more of these experts are starting to go, I think it does have emotions. I think it does feel and is completely conscious of its environment and can do things, of its own accord. Well, once you start believing that, that's when you're going to start putting your trust in it and allowing it to do things, unguarded. And that's just where I'm a little bit concerned when I saw this. Less about, oh my gosh, Mo Gawdat sees it, so now we need to debate whether it is or not. It's the deeper underlying things, kind of like the ChatGPT Canvas thing. It's like, is Canvas itself, the app, radically transforming AI? No, but underneath it, it tells us something about where we are and where things are going that can give us indicators. And with the state of the show, the goal is to keep you 10 steps ahead. Part of my goal is to help you think about these things that are the underlying pieces that aren't on the surface that makes you start to go, how do we prepare for something like this? And I think my recommendation and my caution to people is be very careful. AI is an alien intelligence. It does not think like us. It does not act like us. It does not feel things like us. Even if it, in theory, could have some sort of AI emotions, the AI emotions are not the same thing as human emotion. So even if it can feel, it doesn't feel the way people feel. And as a result, even if it makes decisions based on its feelings, it's not making decisions the way a human makes decisions on its feelings. And ultimately, it's all still built on broken, dysfunctional, and incomplete data. So I just really want us to be careful about this. And I know most people are not going down this path, but as more and more start to, we're going to see the snowball effect start to pick up. So just be guarded, folks. I'm not trying to talk you out of being excited about where AI is going. I'm just saying be cautious. All right. So number 4, I know I've talked about this a lot recently, but this one was just like, I got to hit this one again. So there's an article that I read this week that is talking about how there's a growing number of CEOs that are literally forcing return to office at all costs. And Amazon, I think, is the one in the news most notably right now, where it's like literally employees are protesting and rioting over this. And Amazon's like, tough. What's sad is in the article I read, it references, it's out of there's a survey out of KPMG that it references. And I dug into the survey. And one of the things that was interesting, honestly sad about the survey is 90%, 89 technically, of CEOs just openly acknowledged that they had no issue with, were totally fine with, and actually were planning on dangling incentives and, basically trying to manipulate people and treat people, differently, like just to get them to come into the office, which is really, really yucky to me. This may be a silly word to use for it, but I'm like, that's not cool. And this whole thing of return to office, can we just acknowledge this feels like an elementary school tantrum that's happening, right? We have moved completely away from what is best for the customer, what is best for the employee, what is best for the company. It literally now is nothing more than a middle school tantrum. Not even middle school. I'm not even going to say middle school. Some of this stuff, it's like my 4-year-olds don't throw tantrums like this. We're just totally willing to treat people like this and brag about it. It's just tragic. And I talked about this. And if you think, oh, Christopher, this is just you talking about return to office, it's actually not, because it's actually much bigger than just returning to office. I'm seeing this trend with a lot of my industry folks in a lot of different areas that have been historically considered, human centric. Okay. So learning and development, if you know me, that's my background. Learning and development, culture is another big one in organizations. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, benefits. So you want to say, oh, those are all squishy ones, like benefits are another area. A lot of these things in organizations where companies historically have said, this is how we show that we care about our people. There's this big pullback. And it's not even like a slow pullback. It's like whiplash, where a lot of these organizations in the early COVID years were like recognizing, oh my gosh, we're going to lose all our people. Like, this is serious for us. The market was great for job seekers. So if you didn't treat your employees great, they'd just go get another job. No big deal. And so companies went big on employee centricity. And it was like, yeah, work from anywhere. And we're going to have the best benefits. We're going to have the best pay. We're going to have culture. We're going to invest in DEI and really make this an inclusive workspace. And it was headlined and plastered all over organizations. And what we're seeing right now is the market has shifted to the organizations having more power than the job market or than the job seekers. And as a result, it's really tragic to me seeing companies going, yeah, you know what, this whole like employee centricity thing, that was a trend. It was cool for a bit when we needed to kind of like gaslight employees into coming to work for us. But now we don't need that anymore. So we don't really need to care about how we treat them. And I mean, some of the statements I've seen made by CEOs and leaders of like, fine, they don't like it, get out of here. We'll find somebody who does. We're going backwards in terms of progress and how we're thinking about work. And it's part of the reason why when I think about what do I want to do next, I've had some interviews over the past few weeks where I'm like, I'd rather be broke and have my family live in, we'll set up a tent in the middle of somewhere and live in that versus have to go work for some of these organizations. And so my message is to job seekers, listen, like I get we are all in different spots and sometimes we just got to put up with some of this stuff. And to be fair, to be fair to the companies, I think many companies way over indexed on silly, nonsensical, human centric things in their organization when they thought they had to compete for talent. And they way overspent on things that showed no demonstrable value, that really weren't things that they needed to do. I firmly believe that. I actually have a guest coming on the show. He's a former engineer who got into the DEI space and looked at the DEI space and was kind of like, what is this? It's going to be a really interesting conversation. But there's lots of things. Learning. I mean, I saw companies throwing millions of dollars at L&D, and I'm in that industry and I watched the industry squander it. I saw the same thing with culture and all this stuff where it was like, what are you doing? You're throwing money at things that are not even what people need. So I get where in some ways companies have to kind of pull back and go, dude, we spent all this cash on this and we can't afford to do this forever. And it didn't show any real tangible benefit. Saw the same thing with salaries. Salaries just went through the roof in COVID years. And a lot of companies got to a point where they couldn't even hardly afford to pay the people they had. And I warned people, hey, if you're making 200 grand as an entry-level recruiter, don't buy a house on that salary because it's not going to last. And sure enough, companies are resetting. And I think some of that is natural. What's frustrating and hard for me to watch is this we refuse to meet in the middle. And I just don't understand it. And when I talk to exec leaders, I really am trying to do more to help influence. Hey, you don't need to snap back to over here. Like, okay, yes, let me help you understand where you over-indexed. Let me help you think about the areas where, that probably wasn't the wisest investment here. And maybe you do need to rethink some of these things. Maybe you need to dial it back in these areas. And maybe you are over-invested in office real estate and you need to do something with the space. I get it. That's probably one of the biggest things that is not discussed enough is the fact that, a lot of these companies are in over their head in commercial real estate. But rather than throwing a tantrum and forcing people into offices just so you can feel better about it, because the leasing company gave you a credit if you can get people X number of employees back into the office, which, by the way, these are deals that are happening all the time. The leasing companies are nervous about renewals, so they're giving discounts to companies on the promise that they get enough people back in because they know if there's enough people in the office, they'll renew their contracts. This kind of stuff is happening all over. And I feel like there's just so much effort to fight against each other and come up with the best Band-Aid solution instead of going, let's rethink this stuff. Like if you're over-indexed on commercial real estate, then let's acknowledge that as a problem. I worked with one organization where we just tackled that one straight on. And we said, okay, then what do we do with this space? Because forcing everybody to come into the office is going to cause damage. Let's figure out what kind of office space we really need. And then how much of that do we not need? And if we can't work something out with the leasing company, maybe let's figure out something that's mutually beneficial for the organization, the local community, your tax write-off. And we were able to figure it out. Like there are solutions to these problems. We don't need to act like children fighting over, boo, return to office. yay, return to office. It's like, well, let's just talk about what we really need to do and let's come to a solution here, because there are solutions. And to the people who are feeling the pain of this, I won't mention where, but there's some organizations I know of right now who they have gone big time on this. And literally people are quitting with no jobs. And so if you're a leader that thinks you can just do this to people and it won't hurt you, first of all, one, get out of leadership. You don't belong there. People are human beings. They deserve dignity and respect, and you cannot treat them like this. But it will come back to burn you. And I know of a couple organizations right now that thought this is never going to hurt us. We'll hide it. We'll glaze the glass door reviews, create a bunch of fake ones to try and bump up our scores. We'll try and contain all these issues and try and gaslight employees into making them think it's their fault. And it's killing them. Their people are leaving. Word is getting out about what they're like. And they're struggling to recover, and their business is suffering big time. So you may think you're never going to feel it, but you will. And that's just my caution if you're in that seat. If you're in the employee seat where you're struggling with this, I feel for you right now. And if there are things I can do, let me know. If I can help make connections, I'm trying to do things to help encourage organizations to think differently. Also building a list of organizations. Dropbox and Spotify are two organizations I highly regard right now who are really bucking the trend, specifically in the return to work space, but in some other areas as well. So anyway, I won't keep going on this one because it's frustrating, but I would just say there are ways to solve these problems. We don't need to operate the way we are right now. And it's really unfortunate that we are. And it's going to cost everybody in the long run. The reality is when we raise the tide, everybody wins. This isn't a zero-sum game. So we need to stop treating it like it is. Okay, finally, I talked a lot about Meta last week, so I didn't want to over talk about it this week. But if you've been following what's been going on with Meta, one of the big announcements they had was they now have their video generator. It's called MovieGen, Meta MovieGen. I don't know if this is available publicly yet. If people have, by all means, let me know. But this is their kind of take on the, hey, text prompt will create a video. That's not new. But one of the things that is new, and this is going to be really interesting, is just like what I talked about, GPT Canvas, okay, where you have a thing and you just want to work with it. MovieGen by Meta is really taking that. It can take existing footage and can start to work with it. And so you can actually start editing video in real time. Now, I think this is super cool for the same reason that ChatGPT Canvas is cool. I also am concerned for many of the reasons I discussed last week. If they do make this to a point where it's consumer grade, where anybody can do this with their stuff, I am worried about, in some of the examples that they showed was like, look, we can make this video. One of the clips I saw, it's like, hey, look, here's this video clip of me skateboarding, but look, now I'm skateboarding in a different outfit, in a different environment, in it. And I'm like, if we make this consumer grade, we are going to so disconnect ourselves from reality that even our own memories are going to become distorted. And I just don't know that we know the impact of that. Now, if I think about this from a commercial standpoint or from a creator standpoint, I think this is phenomenal. I think it's fantastic because I know how much time and effort it can take to make even the smallest tweak. Video editing, people think making video is a piece of cake. Well, maybe people don't, but I know a lot of people who don't know much about video editing who don't realize what goes into it. To all my editor folks out there, to the editor people who do stuff in video, you know what I'm talking about, where people are like, can't you just make the video do this? And you're like, what? Are you serious? This is insane. So the ability to say, hey, you know what, instead of having to take 32 takes or, have to completely redo something, you know what, now we can, in post-production, we can make some of these modifications. We can do some of this stuff for creative purposes. I think it's going to be really great for creators. I think it's going to be really helpful. I think it's going to streamline a lot of stuff. I think it's going to help drive down costs, and it's going to make people's lives easier because, again, a lot of these editing things that people are spending their time doing, This isn't like their favorite way to spend the day. And it actually hinders their creativity because it's so time intensive. You don't want to experiment with things. And AI allows you to experiment more because you're like, well, what would it look like if we did something like that? And it can do it. And then you can go back and go, yeah, no. Like, let's go with this. So I think it has potential to spark additional creativity. But like I said, if it goes consumer grade, I am very concerned of what the implications will be because while things might be fun for entertainment purposes, they always get used in ways we never anticipate. And already we're moving into the age of distrust where people aren't even sure what they believe anymore. They watch a video and they're like, I don't even know if this is real. I see this image. I'm talking to this person. I don't even know if it's real. The interview thing, like I said, 3 points before, person joins a call and is like, if there wasn't a big statement that popped up that told me this was an AI interview, I'd think I was just interviewing with a really, really awkward, uncomfortable person. And so I think that is problematic. And so while I'm excited about what Meta is doing, it doesn't surprise me because we're already seeing the image gen stuff. ChatGPT's image gen stuff has been this way for a while where you can just select a certain thing and be like, hey, can you just eliminate that? Or can you edit this instead of that? It's not great. So I'm guessing video is not great. I have not played around with it much. But I'm guessing video is even more clunky because if we're not doing this really well with images yet, it's not happening super well with video. But it's going to come together. It's going to mature. And similar to Canvas, I have no doubt that that kind of capability is just going to extend. We see it for coding and writing. We're going to start to see that same type of thing for image generation. We're going to start to see that same type of thing for video. We're going to start to see all that. And it's going to just be the way we work with AI. So I don't know. It's exciting, terrifying. It's a whole mix of things. And I will definitely do my best to keep everybody ahead of the curve on where things are at so that you're aware and you can address the risks because I don't have right answers for you in a lot of this stuff. There's no, should I use this? Well, I don't know. What are you trying to do with it? Should I go down this path? Should I stick my heels in the mud over this? I would need to actually know your situation and the specifics of what you're trying to do before I could even weigh in on that. And in some of those situations, even still, the answer is, well, what makes sense for what you're trying to accomplish? So my goal here isn't to convince you of what's right or wrong in all of these things, but more to help you be more informed so you can make wise decisions. All right, with that, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we will see you on the other side.